Before we begin today's story, let us know in the comment section what time and part of the world you are listening from. Also, if you enjoy today's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The Chicago skyline shimmered with ambition that night. Glass towers lit like beacons, a city alive with politics, power, and carefully curated charm. Inside the historic Langford Hotel, the grand ballroom buzzed with Chicago's elite, state senators, tech CEOs, donors in diamonds, and journalists with ready pens. Crystal chandeliers gleamed over tuxedos and champagne. Ivy Moore stood quietly at the edge of it all, draped in a navy silk gown that skimmed the floor. Her hair swept into a low chignon that made her look like a still photograph from a more graceful era. She wasn't the kind of woman who fought for the center of attention. She was the one who polished it for others. Owen Thorne, her husband of 6 years, commanded that spotlight tonight. He moved through the crowd like a man born to do it, flashing that politician's smile, gripping hands, telling jokes in perfect cadence. People didn't just listen to Owen. They leaned into him, eager to catch the glimmer of whatever came next. Ivy had once leaned in too. She watched him from a few feet away, glass in hand, invisible but present. She was always present. She had written the opening remarks he gave that night, adjusting his tone to strike the right balance between humility and vision. She'd coached him through his media prep, helped him rehearse the story about his working-class upbringing, reminded him to speak from the chest when he mentioned family values. But the word family caught like a splinter in her throat now. When the applause for his keynote died and the crowd thinned, Owen approached her with that same performative warmth. "You did great," Ivy said softly. He smiled, but something about his eyes didn't reach her. "Let's go." I called the car. They rode in silence through the damp October night, Chicago's lights blurring behind the fogged windows. Ivy's fingers traced a pattern on the hem of her dress, the silence between them too sharp, too loaded to be comfortable. Owen broke it first. "Ivy," he began, voice even rehearsed. "We need to talk." She turned to face him. The words were too familiar. "We need to talk" had never led anywhere safe. He didn't wait. "You've been incredible, steady, kind. But the campaign is entering a national spotlight, and there are concerns." "What kind of concerns?" she asked, though she already knew. He inhaled slowly, like this was hard for him. "Your past work, your public mental health pieces, they're becoming a distraction. The advisors are worried. They say the narrative's shifting." Ivy blinked. "You mean your narrative is shifting?" "They're saying voters want confidence, clarity. They want leadership without complication." "Without complication," she repeated, tasting the bitterness of the phrase. I need to protect the campaign's future." "And I'm a liability to that future?" He didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. She nodded slowly, heart thickening behind her ribs. "So you'd rather be elected by strangers than loved by truth?" "Ivy, come on, it's not that simple." "It is," she said, more steady than she felt. "It's exactly that simple." Owen looked away, jaw clenched. "This life isn't easy. You knew that when we started. I thought we were building it together. I am building it. You've stopped being part of the plan." Those words crushed something delicate inside her chest. She stared at the man she had shared her bed, her dreams, her quietest fears with, and realized he had already made his choice long before tonight. By morning, the decision was official. A terse email from his lawyer. Irreconcilable differences. Headlines followed within days. Leaks of therapy notes twisted out of context. Tabloid speculation about breakdowns and emotional fragility. Former friends stopped returning her calls. Her name became a cautionary tale in polished circles. She disappeared. Her elegant Lakeview home was traded for a narrow, third-floor apartment above a florist's shop on the south side. The place smelled like tulips and damp wood, and she liked that it didn't carry echoes of Owen's cologne. Her designer dresses were packed in boxes. She bought second-hand sweaters. She let her hair go natural, chopped it shorter, like cutting ties to who she'd been. Only her younger brother Leo knew where she was. Once a week, he brought groceries and warmth. "You're not broken, Ivy," he told her once, laying a protective hand on her shoulder. "You're just under renovation." She smiled, but barely. Her voice was buried beneath bruised pride. Days bled into nights, quiet and gray. The city outside moved fast, but Ivy drifted, until she found the shelter. The Women's Trauma Center sat 2 bus routes from her apartment, tucked behind a church and flanked by a mural of fierce, brown-eyed girls with clenched fists. It wasn't glamorous. It smelled like burnt coffee and hand sanitizer. But when she walked through its doors as Mia, something in her exhaled. She volunteered for night circles. No one asked about her past. They were too busy wrestling with their own. She poured coffee, swept floors, and listened. God, she listened. One woman spoke about escaping an abusive husband after 20 years. Another about a mother who never saw her. A teenage girl cried for 2 hours without speaking a word. Ivy held her hand. For months, Ivy said little. Until, one rainy evening, a woman with a scar across her cheek looked at her and said, "You listen like you've been through it, but you speak like you forgot your voice." Ivy sat stunned. That night, she pulled out her old laptop, the one that hadn't seen light since the divorce. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then she began to type. It wasn't a memoir. Not yet. Just thoughts, fragments, journal entries that read like manifestos. "Women aren't unstable for feeling deeply," she wrote. "Vulnerability is not volatility. It's truth stripped of armor." She posted them anonymously on a modest blog. The Light Between. She didn't expect anyone to read it, but within days the entries spread. A journalist shared one. Then a counselor. Then a teacher. Thousands of reads. Emails began arriving from women who saw themselves in her words. Someone wrote, "Whoever you are, thank you for reminding me I'm not broken, just unfinished." And in that moment Ivy Moore realized the world hadn't silenced her. She had simply forgotten she could speak. And now, she was remembering. The morning Ivy signed the paperwork to formally establish The Light Between, she didn't cry. She didn't even smile. She simply sat on the edge of her modest desk, the sun washing in through the windows of the converted studio space she now called headquarters, and she breathed. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were scuffed, the floors creaked, the heat worked only when coaxed, but it was hers, built not from image, but intention. The nonprofit would focus on trauma-informed leadership for women in public life, workshops, support circles, storytelling retreats, real tools for real pain, not optics, not spin. "Let them brand themselves," Ivy muttered under her breath one morning as she unpacked the first delivery of folding chairs. "We're building something real." That was when the email from Elias arrived. The subject line was simple. Documentary proposal, The Light Between. Ivy almost deleted it. She had heard of Elias in passing, a former war photographer who'd left the front lines after a decade of embedded coverage to pursue long-form human stories. His last film, Beneath the Silence, had gone viral for its intimate portrayal of a grief counselor in Appalachia. He was known for disappearing behind his camera. Quiet, non-intrusive, a storyteller who didn't sensationalize suffering. But even so, Ivy's gut reaction was no. She'd spent too long having her story told for her. Still, something about the message made her pause. He hadn't asked for an interview. He'd asked for permission. "Your work matters," the message read. "I believe people need to see it, uncurated, unvarnished. I'm not interested in rehashing your past. I'm interested in the revolution you're building now." She let it sit in her inbox for a week, then another. But eventually she replied, "No politics, no scandal, just truth." He responded within minutes. "That's all I'm after." They met in person 2 days later in a local coffee shop, the kind with hand-painted mugs and mismatched chairs. Elias stood as she approached. Tall, olive-skinned, a faded gray scarf slung around his neck despite the spring air. His eyes were not sharp but watchful, softened by the kind of grief that no longer burned, but lingered. "Ivy," he greeted simply, like they were old friends. She nodded, cautious but not cold. Their conversation was quiet at first, like circling a new space in the dark. She didn't speak about Owen. He didn't ask. Instead, they talked about stories, the weight of them, the harm they could do when told carelessly. "I don't want to frame you as a victim or a phoenix," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I want to show what it looks like to rebuild without applause." She watched him closely, searching for the inevitable hunger for spectacle. But it wasn't there. "All right," she said. "We'll try." Over the next few weeks, Elias became a shadow in Ivy's world. He filmed everything, quietly, respectfully. Morning sessions where women practiced assertive speech, late-night staff meetings about funding. Even Ivy's solitude, shot with reverence, her writing by lamplight, her reading under a blanket, her sitting alone on a bench by the lake, hands tucked into her sleeves. It was his questions between shoots that drew her in. "Why do you think people are so afraid of women who speak openly about pain? What do you think power looks like when it's held gently?" She found herself answering more freely than she expected, and soon it became routine. After workshop days, he would stay behind and help stack chairs. Then they'd sit, cross-legged on the hardwood, eating takeout from the corner Thai place. One night, he asked, "What did it cost you, staying silent all those years?" The room stilled around her. She set down her chopsticks, eyes distant. "Everything I hadn't yet become." He said nothing, only nodded, because he understood. They didn't flirt, not in the traditional sense, but something bloomed in the spaces between their words. She noticed how he stood slightly to the side when she spoke to groups, never in her light, never in her way. How he refilled her water bottle before she asked. How he sent her songs late at night, instrumental tracks without lyrics, soundscapes of piano and cello and wind. She began waiting for his texts. He never pushed, never probed, and because of that, she began offering small pieces of herself unprompted. One evening, after a difficult session with a survivor who'd recounted a near-death experience with her abuser, Ivy sat alone in her office, eyes red-rimmed, breath shallow. Elias appeared at the door, his camera forgotten on the desk. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice gentle. "I'm fine," she said out of reflex. Then, after a beat, "No, I'm tired. I'm angry. I'm grieving a version of myself I never got to be." He sat beside her. "Not too close. Just enough. We both carry ghosts," she murmured. "But maybe we don't have to carry them alone." He reached out, not to hug her, not to consume her, but simply to touch her hand. A grounding point. A promise. His fingers were rough, calloused. Hers, still trembling. She didn't pull away. It was weeks before he told her about the boy in Syria. They were reviewing footage late at night. The office was dim, except for the glow of the editing monitor. She asked him why he'd left frontline journalism. His mouth tensed, his eyes flicked to the floor. "I was in Aleppo," he said quietly. "Embedded with a family, the youngest son, Naeem. He followed me around everywhere, wanted to take pictures with my old Nikon. I taught him how to frame a shot." He swallowed hard. "Then the shelling started. I made it to shelter. He didn't." Ivy's breath caught. "I couldn't pick up a camera for a year after that," he said. "Because what's the point of capturing anything if you couldn't save the thing that mattered?" She reached for him then. No words, just presence. Later that night, as he left, she stood at the door longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For not needing me to be okay all the time." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But one morning, Ivy found a single yellow envelope on her desk. Inside was a photo Elias had taken of her during a workshop. Her arms extended mid-sentence, a group of women laughing around her, light falling through the window like blessing. She looked powerful, whole. On the back, he had written, "You look like someone who has nothing left to prove." Her hands trembled, not from sadness, from recognition. The air in Chicago grew heavy with election buzz again. Campaign buses, lawn signs, and political ads that painted hope in bold blues and reds. Owen Thorne's name returned to the headlines like an echo Ivy had once silenced with grace and grit. But now, it returned louder, needier. Owen's approval ratings were slipping. A quiet scandal, one involving questionable donors, had rattled his campaign. Whispers grew. His team needed a pivot, a human moment, a redemption arc, and there was only one card left to play: Ivy. She received the invitation on a Thursday morning, printed on expensive cardstock, hand-delivered to her office. An evening for unity, reconciliation, special guest, Ivy Moore. No one asked her permission. They assumed nostalgia could be weaponized. She stared at the envelope for a long time, then slid it across the table toward Leo, who sat across from her during their usual breakfast debrief. "You're not actually considering this," he said, already bristling. "I haven't decided," she replied, voice even. Leo's jaw tightened. "You don't owe him your presence, Ivy." She knew that, but something inside her was unfinished, unanswered. And Ivy had learned that the only way to heal a wound was to stop pretending it didn't bleed. When Ivy told Elias about the invitation, she expected judgment, maybe disappointment. Instead, he just looked at her, eyes thoughtful and steady. "I won't tell you what to do," he said. "But if you go, I'll be here when you get back." She swallowed the lump in her throat. He meant it, she could tell. It wasn't permission, it was partnership. The gala was held at the same hotel where everything had unraveled 2 years ago, the Langford. Ivy stood at the entrance in a midnight black suit with clean lines and no apology in its silhouette. Her curls framed her face freely this time. No pins, no armor. She wore no wedding ring, no borrowed smile. As she walked in, heads turned. Not because she was flashy, but because she didn't shrink. Owen spotted her immediately. He approached with a familiar smile, polished and hollow. "Ivy," he said, taking her hand without asking, "thank you for coming." "I'm not here for you," she replied softly. "I'm here to see something through." The evening unfolded in typical political theater. Drinks, speeches, hollow applause. Ivy kept to herself, observing rather than engaging, until Owen took the stage. He spoke of second chances, unity, and growth. He even chuckled as he referenced those who once stood beside him and helped shape the man he'd become. Then, in a tone meant to sound humble, he added, "Some wounds take time to heal, but I believe reconciliation is the bravest kind of leadership. Don't you?" The audience clapped. Ivy sat still. Later, backstage, Owen found her again, this time unfiltered. "You see how they ate it up?" he said, eyes gleaming. "They love a comeback. We had a good thing, Ivy. You were part of my foundation. You still could be." She stared at him. "We both know," he said, lowering his voice, "you wouldn't have made it without the platform I gave you." The words landed like acid. But Ivy didn't flinch. She stepped forward, lifted her chin, and said, "I didn't rise because of you, Owen. I rose despite you. And if you truly believed in reconciliation, you'd start by telling the truth, not performing it." Unbeknownst to either of them, a nearby press tech was adjusting a boom mic, live and recording. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. The headlines flared like dry grass set on fire. Ivy Moore versus Owen Thorne. truth at the gala. X, wife shuts down political spin. Hot mic, cold truth. Ivy's inbox overflowed with interview requests. Some reporters wanted to cast her as a feminist icon. Others wanted scandal. Still others offered book deals before she'd even had coffee. And just like that, the old anxiety returned. The world had pulled her into a spotlight she didn't ask for. Again. She sat on the floor of her office, back pressed to the wall, knees to her chest. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But the pressure built like a storm behind her ribs. Elias walked in carrying 2 coffees and found her there, quiet, fragile in her strength. He said nothing at first, just set the coffees down and sat across from her, mirroring her position. "I shouldn't have gone," she murmured. "You had to," he replied. "And you were brilliant." She looked up, eyes glassy. "They'll twist this. Make it about revenge, about instability, again. Then let me show them something else," he said softly. He reached into his bag and pulled out his laptop. "I finished the first cut," he said. "I want you to see it." She nodded. The room dimmed as the footage rolled. There were no dramatic angles, no sweeping music, just Ivy, in her own voice, speaking during a workshop, listening to a survivor, holding space, laughing gently with a group of young leaders, telling her story, not the scandal, but the journey after it. Then came the final scene. Ivy stood by the lake, the wind tugging at her scarf, her face calm but unguarded. Her voice, from an earlier interview, played over the image. "They tried to write my story for me, so I picked up the pen." The screen went black. Ivy sat in silence, tears sliding down her cheeks, not from pain, but recognition, wholeness. She turned to Elias, her throat tight. "You didn't frame me," she whispered. "You saw me." He reached for her hand again, gently, without urgency. "You don't need defending, Ivy, but I will stand next to you, always." There was something about the way he said it that landed deeper than affection. It was presence, it was permanence. And Ivy, for once, didn't feel the need to guard her heart. She leaned into him, not because she needed saving, but because she finally understood what it meant to be seen. The days that followed the documentary premiere were unlike anything Ivy had ever known. Not overwhelming, not chaotic, but clarifying. Like a morning after snowfall, when the world is muffled, bright, and changed. The short film Elias had crafted, the one she first watched alone with him, on the floor of her office, was released quietly on the Light Between's website. No press tour. No splashy promo, just truth, shared without spectacle. It spread like wildfire anyway. People wrote in from all over the country. CEOs, janitors, college students, single mothers, survivors, soldiers, and school teachers. Some had known loss, some had fled harm. Some had simply spent too long hiding behind a version of themselves that fit someone else's comfort. They all said the same thing. "Thank you for reminding me I can start over." And Ivy for once let herself receive the words. No deflecting, no minimization, just quiet, anchoring gratitude. One morning, as she looked out the office window at a group of women arriving for their leadership retreat, Ivy turned to Elias, who had come in early with fresh scones from the bakery down the block, and said, "I think I'm ready to say yes." He blinked, confused. "Yes, to what?" She smiled. "To the stage, to the microphone, to telling it all, on my terms." The invitation had been sitting on her desk for weeks. A request to headline the keynote at the National Women's Summit for Civic Empowerment. Thousands of women in leadership roles, from senators to social workers, would attend. Ivy had been torn, but the film had shown her something, how far she'd come, and how far others still needed to go. Her silence no longer protected her. It starved the future. And so, on the morning of the summit, Ivy stood behind the curtain of the Grand Theater stage in D.C., palms pressed together, her breath steady. Her outfit was simple, a bone-white pantsuit and a small pendant Leo had given her when she launched The Light Between. In the audience, rows of women waited. And just to the left, camera in hand, was Elias. He wasn't filming her this time. He was witnessing. The host introduced her as a voice that rose from public rupture to public healing, and when Ivy walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous, but she didn't rush to the podium. She stood for a moment in silence, scanning the room, grounding herself in the faces of women who were not strangers, but reflections. Then she began. "I used to believe that leadership meant control," she said. "That strength looked like never cracking, that to be taken seriously, I had to be polished, calm, composed, no matter what burned inside me. But the truth is, I was never more hollow than when I was trying to be bulletproof. It was only when my world shattered, when my name was dragged, my truth weaponized, and my voice stolen, that I realized what strength really is. It's not perfection, it's presence. It's staying when the room goes quiet, when your hands shake, when your past is louder than your present. I didn't reclaim my power by pretending to be okay. I reclaimed it by refusing to pretend." The room fell still, heavy with held breath. If you've ever been told you're too emotional, too complicated, too soft, congratulations, she added, voice rising now. Those are the very things that make you powerful, not in spite of your pain, because of it. We don't need to lead like the world expects. We need to lead like ourselves. She closed with a line that would later go viral. You don't have to rebuild who you were. You get to build who you want to become. When she stepped back from the mic, there were tears, standing ovations. Women lined up to hug her, not like a celebrity, but like a sister. Backstage, Elias was waiting. He didn't say anything, just looked at her with that quiet awe that never faded. Ivy stepped into his arms without hesitation, her forehead resting against his chest. I didn't realize how much I needed to say that, she whispered. I did, he replied. Every word. She leaned back and looked at him. Really looked. Her heart was no longer a cautious thing. It was open, whole. Come with me, she said suddenly. He smiled, teasing. Where? Into the next chapter. He blinked. Are you? No grand proposal, she interrupted gently. No rings, just this question. Will you keep walking beside me? Not as a documentarian, not as a shadow, but as my partner, my equal. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he took her face in both hands, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and said, I've been walking with you since that first coffee shop meeting. This is just me, catching up. And then, finally, he kissed her. Not rushed, not desperate, but sure. A kiss that said we made it through. A kiss that promised, we'll keep going. That night, they returned to their rooftop apartment, the city stretching out below them like a map of everything they'd survived. Ivy stood barefoot on the balcony, sipping tea, her heart still warm from the day's echoes. Elias joined her, arms circling her waist, pulling her into the quiet sanctuary of his body. Do you think we'll always be like this? She asked, head resting on his shoulder. Like what? Stronger because we fell apart first. Elias kissed the top of her head. I think we'll always be building, but now we're building together. 1 year later, Chicago was gentler in the spring. The air smelled like thawed pavement and budding lilacs. The river shimmered like a secret between old buildings, and the skyline no longer felt like a cage to Ivy Moore. It felt like a canvas. In a bright, 3-room office above a neighborhood bookstore, the light between had blossomed into something Ivy once only dreamed of during sleepless nights. What started as local healing circles was now a national initiative. There were now 27 trauma-informed leadership centers across the country, from Tacoma to Tallahassee. Each was led by women who had once whispered their pain and were now speaking, building, mentoring. Ivy's name had become synonymous with authenticity. Not polished, not rehearsed, but deeply real. Her book, Soft Power, Leading Without Armor, had made waves beyond feminist circles. CEOs quoted her in boardrooms. Teachers read her chapters aloud to students. A senator had even cried on camera, recounting how Ivy's words gave her the courage to leave an emotionally abusive marriage. But Ivy never got used to being called an icon. She still flinched at labels. What she believed in most was the quiet work. The hours spent listening, the lives changed in rooms no camera would ever enter. And through it all, Elias remained. Their home was a rooftop apartment with peeling window frames, a crooked bookshelf he built from reclaimed wood, and a tiny balcony filled with potted herbs and wildflowers Ivy coaxed to life. The place always smelled of rosemary and lemon balm, and on rainy days, of wet stone and warm tea. There was no ring on her finger, by choice, not by oversight. They didn't need symbols to prove what they already lived daily. A love rooted in choice, in truth, in soft rituals. In the morning, Elias always left the coffee pot full for her. At night, Ivy curled into him as they watched documentaries or read in quiet companionship. He now taught workshops on ethical storytelling at local colleges and collaborated with grassroots filmmakers across the Midwest. No red carpets, no industry buzz. Just stories that mattered, and the honor of telling them right. He still filmed Ivy sometimes. Never for publication, never for others. Just fragments of her life, her tending to a student's nervous hands, her speaking gently to a woman at the shelter, her laughing uncontrollably in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with flour in her hair. He said capturing her made him feel like he was documenting sunlight. That night, they sat on the rooftop balcony wrapped in a shared blanket. The city pulsed below, horns in the distance, the hum of life moving forward. A soft jazz record played through the open window. The herb garden rustled in the breeze. Ivy cupped a chipped ceramic mug in her hands. The tea had gone cold, but she held it anyway. "You ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, breaking the stillness. Elias turned his head to look at her. "All the time. I used to think pain made me smaller," she murmured, eyes focused on the flickering city lights. "Like it shrank me down to someone timid, unsure, but now I see it made room for light." She turned to him then, her face lit not just by street lamps below, but by something internal, radiant. Elias reached out, sliding his fingers between hers, slow and sure. His touch was never hurried. It always asked permission, even now. "You are the light," he said, voice low with conviction. "You've always been." Ivy's chest tightened with something too big for language. It wasn't the swelling drama of early love. It was deeper, calmer, like coming home after a long journey through storms. She looked at him fully then, letting her gaze drink him in, the way his hair curled slightly at his temples when he was tired, the faint crow's feet that deepened when he smiled, the steady eyes that had never once looked away when she was at her worst. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked after a moment. "The war zones? The danger?" "I miss the honesty of it," he said after some thought. "People don't pretend much when their world is falling apart." She nodded, understanding. "I think I lived in a war zone for a long time. I just didn't know it. Everything looked too clean on the outside." He brought her hand to his lips, kissed the space where her wedding ring used to be, not to claim her, but to honor what she'd let go. "You built something better," he said. "Not just for yourself, for all of us." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but gratitude. The kind that comes when you realize you survived, not just the loss, but the aftermath. "Sometimes I still hear his voice," she admitted softly, "telling me I wasn't enough, that I was too fragile, too messy. Elias nodded, not to dismiss, but to witness. "And then I hear mine," she added. Stronger, clearer, telling him to sit down and watch. He laughed quietly, then leaned his forehead against hers. "I love your voice. I love the way you make space for it," she whispered. The city below blurred as the tears she let fall this time weren't hidden. She didn't wipe them away. He kissed the corner of her mouth, then her cheek, then the space above her brow. Not claiming, just revering. They sat like that, held in the quiet holiness of the moment. Above them, stars flickered through the haze. Below them, the world carried on. And between them, the kind of love no storm could threaten. In the years to come, the light between would grow into a global movement. Ivy's words would echo in graduation halls, in prisons, in executive boardrooms, in shelters that bore her foundation's logo. But the world would never see the moment that mattered most. A woman once shattered, now whole, wrapped in love and moonlight, sipping cold tea on a quiet balcony, knowing that her greatest victory wasn't survival. It was choosing every single day to rise,